Right then, you blistered banshees, flip your phone landscape so you can see this in full view, because today I have another tutorial for you where I'm going to show you how to recreate that natural Netflix look. So if you want your projects to turn into BAFTA-winning documentaries, grab yourselves a coffee and get prepared to be learned, okay? Just before we get started, I wanted to mention that we are well on our way to reach 3k subs. That is the mission over the next few weeks. I'm trying to hit 3k subs, so thank you everyone that's subscribing, leaving comments, hitting the like button on these videos. You don't understand how much it actually helps, because it's also going to allow me to give back to you guys. And if you do want some more free stuff, I need you to stick around on this channel, because I've got something very special coming for you very soon. Okay, Vato, let's get into this tutorial, man. I cheat, I steal Eddie Guerrero. Right now, this isn't going to be a full-blown tutorial, because I do want to keep these videos digestible for you whilst you're watching them, because I know you dozy sods like to take frequent naps, and I don't want you napping in between my videos. So maybe when I do finally activate the memberships on my channel, I will do a more detailed breakdown. But there are two little tricky osos that I want to take you through in this today, so I'm going to be focusing on them more so than all of the other nodes. But first and foremost, so unless you are a blind one, you can see that there is Rec 709 conversion happening here. But more importantly, it's happening to all of the clips all at once. And the reason for that is I have gone ahead and grouped these clips down at the bottom, and I've done that through the color tab. And I've also gone ahead and activated this camera raw tab, which enables me to either change parameters of the raw clip, which is one of the benefits if you are working with a raw clip or raw footage. But it also gives me the information that I need to be able to go into my CST and figure out what parameters I want. As you can see here, this says Arri wide, whereas the footage is actually black magic. So before we even start looking at some of the more detailed nodes, why did I convert this from black magic to Arri wide gamut? When I was analyzing this clip and I was thinking about where I wanted to take this look, I thought, this would work better for me if this was converted over into an Arri color space. So that's what I went ahead and did. And the main reason for doing that is because I feel like the Arri color space works beautifully with compositions similar to the ones that I have on my timeline. So I converted it over to Arri log, and then I converted it over to a Rec 709. And then I started working on this crazy looking node tree. But don't worry, there's not actually super complex things happening here. It's a lot of what I've already been through on this channel. So if you want some answers to things that you're not getting in this video, go watch the other videos. What do you think I create them for? I'm not just creating them so you can slap sausage along to my voice, okay? Now that I got that out of the way, pussy holes, right, let's get into node number one. So the first thing that I've done is I've actually gone in with my balance, my white balance, just because I have converted this into a linear node and I need it to affect the rest of the node tree on a linear basis. So if that comes after the exposure, it's not going to come across the same way that it would if it was prioritized as the very first node. Then I've gone ahead and gone into my HDR wheels and I've leveled out this shot. I've gone ahead and dropped that global exposure. Why? Because if you look at this image pre-exposure work, you can see it's quite high key, and I want to be able to create more drama. When you think about those Netflix documentaries, there's a lot of tonality, a lot of density, a lot of character there, even in the shadows, the skin tones, the highlights. So I wanted to drop that exposure just so I could start getting it into that world. Then I went ahead and did some more work within the primary wheels, dropping the game, playing around with the gamma, playing around with the lift. It's a balancing act, and I don't want you to just go ahead and use all of my pre-established settings, because it might not be appropriate for the shot that you have in front of you. All of these shots are available through Blackmagic's website. You just have to remember that the credit belongs to the creators of these clips. Moving on, then I went into the trusted old HSV node. And no, HSV does not stand for highly sensitive vibrations. It's actually how I like to control my saturation. When I'm toggling this node on and off, you can see that it's adding a little bit more life into the overall image, and it's giving me a little bit more room should I need to pull any keys or swing any hues. It's just bringing this image to life, and the result that it's having on this overall composition is one that I'm actually really fond of. From there, we're moving on to our very first parallel node. There's a blending operation of how we're handling our contrast. The very top node, I'm using my custom curve to create a nice S curve, and then I'm going into the bottom one and I'm just pulling back some of the contrast, and then I'm closing down that pivot, which is giving me a softer rendition of the overall contrast. So if I just disable this one, you can see it's a little bit more high key, it's a little bit more harsh, but then when I activate this, it's creating what I would call more of a cinematic type of contrast for this overall image, and it's very soft, it's nice to look at. Following that, I've gone ahead and made a blank serial node just in case I wanted to do any adjustments or make slight changes to the overall look. But as of yet, I haven't felt the need to do that. From there, I've moved straight into a layer mixer. This is where things are going to start to get interesting. Right now, it looks bloody awful. But when I show you what's actually happening here, you'll see. Right now, it's as if I've gone ahead and paid the cheapest VFX artist on Fiverr to go ahead, cut out my Donny sat in middle and just paste him onto a dark background. But in actual fact, when I go ahead and activate the other nodes, you can see that it starts to blend a little bit nicer. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to create some separation. But let's just go ahead and disable these other nodes for a second and actually show you what's happening. So if I enable the OFX and go into this node, you can see that I've keyed him out and I've used the tracker, the very intelligent tracker within DaVinci, to create the information for me. Then I'm going ahead and I'm inverting that, so whatever I'm doing in this node is affecting everything in the background opposed to my guy here. And you can see I'm darkening this background because I want to create more drama. I'm developing a narrative in my head as to what type of project this could slot into. And for me, this Donny sat here is doing the maddest whistleblowing interview about some corrupt organizations within a fat golf tournament, and that's why I'm trying to create that drama. On the flip side, what's happening over here is I'm just pulling him out a little bit more. I'm using the center point within my gamma just to warm up his skin tone a tiny bit, and it's also doing me a favor by warming up the rest of it. And the reason I chose to go in a slightly warmer direction is because some of the highlights that were coming through, if I look at his shoulder, there's a really nice warm light coming in, and even on my man's face. So I wanted to just give it a little bit more warmth. So right, let's go ahead and activate the second batch of layer mixers. I'm taking the shadows at the bottom and I'm taking the highlights at the top, and specifically with the shadows, I've just added a little bit of heat into them as well, because this guy being so warm and the shadows being so cold don't really mesh well together in my opinion. So I've just moved the shadows into the realm of where I feel like they would match nicer with our main subject. And with the highlights, I'm just grabbing the highlights that are mainly situated on the left of his face and I'm just compressing them a tiny bit. I'm just pulling out a little bit of the heat that's in there, just so it blends in a little bit nicer with the rest of the image. Moving on, I've created another parallel mixer for the purpose of windows, and the only current window that I have here at the moment is this little window situated on the dark side of his face. As you can see, I've softened it quite a bit just so it can blend in with the rest of his face and isn't coming across as too harsh. But the way that I'm handling the intensity of the darkness within these shadows is through the HDR wheels, just because I feel like it gives me a nicer rendition of how these shadows on his face are presented. And then from there, the next node is the color slice tool. And for me to make this into a more filmic image, the color slice is helping me create that density. It's helping me experiment a little bit more with that tonality, but in a very cinematic way. And that's helping me tie together this natural Netflix look. If I just punch into this guy's eyes, specifically this one's in focus, obviously. This is where the focus is in this image, but this one's just a little bit too blurry. Even some of like the details on his face are just kind of being lost within the softness of this image. So what I did after that, I'll just punch in a little bit more. I just created a node and added some sharpness back into this image. Not much. All I'm doing is going into my sharpness tool and I'm just dropping it down by about 0.3%, and it's just bringing this image back out, so it's not just feeling like it was shot on a Canon 50D. It does feel like it is a digital image, but it still feels very filmic, and we are retaining that quality. Now, why did I darken this background, and what is this little secret compound node? Let me go ahead and activate that for you. Did you catch it? Did you not catch it? If you keep your eye in the back left of this image, what I'm doing is I'm using the Relight Tool just to insert a little bit more light into the back of the frame, almost as if I'm creating an edge light around the back of his head, just to enhance that separation from him and the background itself. So if I just disable and enable, let me punch in to this part of the image, you can see as soon as I activate it, it just gives him a slight lift from the back of his head, and it just pulls him away from that background instead of him fading into the background. And you can play around with this tool. You can play around with how much of the light you want to bring in, how much reach you want this light to have, how much brightness you want it to have, how subtle you need it to be, the direction of the light. The current parameter that I'm using is a spotlight, but you can also change it to a point source, a directional light. But for me, I just thought this would be a nice little touch in creating a little bit more separation, just so he doesn't fade into the background, and it helps me to enhance that production value. So I'm just going to come out of this little compound node So now if I just go over onto the second version that I've created, you can see that I've given him a slight lift, but I just want to have a little play around with this and see what type of looks we could create on the opposite end of the spectrum. So what I'm going to start off by doing is I'm just going to go into the top node within my layer mixer, and where that gamma is set to a little bit more of a warmer point, I'm going to start bringing it down to a more cooler. And you can see the shift already within the type of vibe we are creating is drastic. This is version 1 and this is version 2. When we start to lean into the more cooler looks, you're creating a whole different palette, a whole different vibe, but you also have to be able to match the rest of the image to this. So instead of the shadows feeling as if they're quite warm, again, I'm going to go into the slightly cooler spectrum. Just like that, and then I'm going to go into the highlights and see what I am grabbing. So you can see that I'm also grabbing this shoulder. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to just compress the shadows a little bit more. And what I might actually do is, so instead of this coming across a little bit green, I'm going to lean into more of the magenta and blue, just so it's a little bit colder, and even that feels quite nice. Then I'm going to go into my second parallel mixer, and I know I wanted to keep this for the purpose of windows, but just for the sake of this experiment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this very warm highlight that's on his shoulder, and then I'm going to start to bring these parameters down, just so I'm grabbing most of what's on his neck and shirt. And then I'm going to create a mask around that using the pen tool, just a very rough mask, just so we can see what the experiment would look like. Go ahead, track that shoulder and neck. And one thing that you need to keep in mind is when you are using Relight, even if you've got a super powerful system, and which my PC is quite powerful, Relight is very heavy on your GPU. So your results moving forward after the use of Relight are going to feel like they're a little bit slower. So if you are using Relight, it needs to be intentional. If the DOP has said, look, we really need to put another light in here, a light source, because we were unable to do it on set, that's an important use case. So then go ahead and use Relight. Don't just use it for the sake of using it. Now that that's tracked, I'm just going to come out of this and I'm going to take the gain and I'm just going to start going in the opposite direction. And I don't want to break the image. I am very conscious of how much scope we have to be able to push and pull. And what I might do is I might just take a tiny bit of saturation out of that. I'm going to just see how much of that we're actually grabbing again. Fair enough, that's fine. And I'm just going to leave that there, disable this window, and just pull back some of the overall saturation just to give it a little bit more of a dramatic tone. And you can even do things like going back into the exposure, going into the HDR wheels, just taking that light part and just bringing it down by maybe say -20. And now this guy looks like he's telling the world about the nuclear power plant up the road that's just been dumping waste into the water supply and everyone's just been sipping it from their dirty taps. If you're not drinking bottled water, you really are a dirty bugger, aren't you? But no, look at the difference between this look and this look. Just by moving a few elements around, just by playing around with the color balance of this image, it's a completely different vibe and it feels like a completely different look. You can go ahead, intensify the shadows if you want, you can go ahead and drop the exposure if you want, you can go ahead and play around with the skin tone, light sources. There's so much that you can do with this. This is how I would personally go about creating that natural look that you'll find in documentaries on Amazon Prime, on Netflix, and it feels really nice to look at. And you little bunch of claptrap crumpets, it's not very difficult to create. It's pretty much the same thing that we do on a day-to-day basis on this channel, just contained within a slightly different node tree. And when you start to understand your nodes and your tree, you can start to create things that look like this on your screen. So look, if you enjoy that tutorial, I would really appreciate it if you could give this video a like, a comment, continue to sub. Like I said at the start of this video, the mission is to get to 3K subs as soon as possible, and I do have another giveaway coming. And no, it's not going to be 1 hour sessions where you get some time with me. This time I'm going to give you guys a little present. So please keep blowing up this channel. It's doing so many things for us and we're growing together as a community. If you want this tutorial in a slightly longer format, let me know in the comments and I'll consider doing a longer format of this tutorial where we're going into each node and breaking it down step by step. So yeah, you know how we end this each and every time, guys. Alright, cool. Chef Odd. Peace.